Every NFL season, there are always a handful of breakout players in the NFL. So today, I want to talk about 5 NFL players that I truly do believe will have breakout seasons in 2024. So like every single one of my top 5 lists, let's start off with a couple honorable mentions. Number 1, Arnold Ebiketie. Number 2, Trayvon Walker. And number 3, Anthony Richardson. I didn't want to include these guys because, for starters, edge rushers aren't that fun to talk about. They'll just probably be better players next year. And Anthony Richardson, I've already talked about to crazy detail in the past couple videos. So if you guys are Anthony Richardson fans, you guys can just check out the past couple videos. But let's hop into the list. Starting off at number 5, I want to talk about Rico Dowdle, the running back for the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the Dallas Cowboys have had a pretty interesting offseason, mainly with the running back position. Everyone really thought that the Dallas Cowboys were going to draft either Jonathan Brooks or Trey Benson or one of those running backs in the NFL draft, but they opted to not take any running back in the NFL draft and instead decided to stick it out with Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle. And while I personally do find that to be a bit of a mistake, I am interested and intrigued by what Rico Dowdle brings to the table. Through 3 seasons with the Dallas Cowboys, he has put together 96 rushing attempts, 385 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and has never really been given a substantial role within the Dallas Cowboys. That's mainly because of the success of guys like Tony Pollard and prime Ezekiel Elliott. But with Ezekiel Elliott joining the team, I don't expect him to be the primary running back on this team. Like, I do expect him to get somewhere between 5 to 10 carries a game, but I do expect guys like Rico Dowdle to easily supplant Ezekiel Elliott and more than likely get over 10 carries per game, which is a large substantial growth in his production based off what we've seen throughout his career. You do have some other running backs on this team, such as Royce Freeman, Deuce Vaughn, and potentially Malik Davis, but I think of those guys, I think it's pretty obvious that Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott are arguably your 2 best options on the team. Ezekiel Elliott will primarily be focused on third and short distances, maybe some goal line touches, and probably some pass protection stuff, whereas Rico Dowdle will probably be your first and second down running back and will be more of your receiving back option. I don't expect him to get anywhere near 1,000 rushing yards this year. I think if he can get up to about 800 rushing yards on about 200 attempts, would be pretty solid for his first year. Next up at number 4, we're going to be talking about Khalil Shakir, the wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills. Through 2 years with the Buffalo Bills, he has 49 receptions, 772 yards, a 15.8 average, 3 touchdowns, and his longest catch in his career is 81 yards. Khalil Shakir is primarily a slot receiver, but can also play a little bit on the outside, and obviously with the departure of Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis, he is going to be thrusted into what is arguably going to be a wide receiver 1/wide receiver 2 position on this team. Of course, you do have newcomer Keon Coleman, who I do expect to take in a lot of the targets and a lot of the receptions and yardage away from a guy like Khalil Shakir, but arguably you're going to need a guy alongside Khalil to help him out to continue to not get those double coverages when it comes down to when he's running routes. Keon Coleman will arguably be more of your deep threat guy who's not going to do a whole lot underneath, whereas Khalil Shakir is going to be a lot more of your underneath guy who maybe occasionally could take the top over the defense when he's asked to do so. I personally do have a lot of faith in Khalil Shakir. I think last year, especially in the second half of the season, we definitely saw him really take some strides. His best game of his career was arguably week 11 of last year when he hit 115 yards in that game. And I do expect him to continue to take strides next year with his route running, with his receiving ability, with his yards after catch, and everything that you want within a wide receiver 1. My expectation for Khalil Shakir is to get close to 1,000 yards, probably get over 50 receptions next year. I would imagine it's going to be close to like 70 receptions, especially with the departure of Stefon Diggs. And while I'm not going to sit here and compare Khalil Shakir to what Stefon Diggs has been for this team, if he can be anywhere near that, I would consider it a successful season for Khalil Shakir. Next up at number 3, I'm going to be kind of cheating on this one, but I'm just going to do the Falcons Trio of Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. I arguably consider just making this full list about some Falcons players that could break out, but I didn't really feel like that was going to be a very fun video, so I decided to condense these 3 names into just one spot. And my thought process behind this is they've been very successful through their young careers with a terrible quarterback situation, and now you got to go out there and get Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix Jr., and now you have 2 bona fide stars in that quarterback position. That's going to allow these stars to really make a ton of plays. We'll start off with Bijan Robinson, who I fully expect to take over the running back 1 roles over some of the guys that took away from him last year. I don't expect Bijan Robinson to get 1,500 rushing yards, but I would expect him to easily supplant probably 1,200 rushing yards and probably 600 passing yards on the year. I think this team is really going to rely heavily on the run game because of how good the offensive line is and because of some of the early on struggles this team might face with the injuries of Kirk Cousins. And given the fact that this guy was taken in the top 10 of the NFL draft just a year ago, I definitely do think that he is going to be a big part of this offense next year. Next, we'll talk about Kyle Pitts, the tight end, of course. He is one of the most talented and maybe the most gifted tight end we've ever seen. But unfortunately, outside of his rookie year, it hasn't really been quite up to the standard that we want from him. And I think a big reason of that is, of course, Arthur Smith in the quarterback position. Well, now you're going to go out there and get some new offensive coordinators who hopefully will utilize his abilities. And of course, getting Kirk Cousins will give him his best quarterback of his career. I expect Kyle Pitts to get maybe 1,000 yards next year or close to, with probably over 5 touchdowns. Those same exact principles also do fall on Drake London, who is an uber talented wide receiver that was taken in the top 10 just a few years ago. I also do expect him to surpass 1,000 receiving yards, maybe over 5 to 8 touchdowns, and of course be a very productive player the entire season. They of course brought in some other wide receivers and shored up some positions on the defense, so I do think that Atlanta Falcons team is primed for a really big breakout season next year. Next up at number 2, we're going to be talking about Jaxon Smith-Njigba, the wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. Last year with the Seattle Seahawks, he put up 63 receptions for 628 yards and 4 touchdowns in his rookie season. In college at Ohio State, he had some incredible seasons with the Ohio State Buckeyes, his biggest year in 2021 where he had 1,600 receiving yards, just an absolutely ridiculous season, and I fully do expect him to take that step forward with the Seattle Seahawks next year. Of course, the team brought back all their wide receivers again heading into next year. You have DK Metcalf, who still will be the wide receiver 1 next year, and of course you have Tyler Lockett, but I do fully expect Jaxon Smith-Njigba to promote himself from being the wide receiver 3 to being the wide receiver 2 for this team. I fully expect him to gain over 1,000 yards next year, probably have over 80 receptions, and hopefully more than 4 touchdowns next year. And my big reasoning for why I think this is going to happen is I do think that Tyler Lockett will potentially take a couple steps back, but not necessarily just because of him growing a little bit older, maybe not as fast, maybe not as productive, but just the fact that this team probably wants to amplify the role of Jaxon Smith-Njigba because he is a young star in the making. At only 22 years of age, the plan for the Seattle Seahawks team should be to have DK Metcalf and JSN be your future tandem and wide receiver, and I do think that starts this year heading into 2024. The plan for this team should be to promote Jaxon Smith-Njigba to be more than just a bona fide slot receiver who can do a couple things on the outside. The plan should be to utilize him in different ways next year, whether it's in the slot or on the outside or wherever it may be. He should be utilized a lot more than Tyler Lockett this upcoming season. Of course, I'm still not going to sit here and tell you guys he's going to be better than DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is a bona fide wide receiver 1 in this league, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba has not quite gotten to that point. But what you're hoping for with JSN is to be a complement and a nice additional piece alongside DK Metcalf for the foreseeable future, and I do think that starts this upcoming season when we see JSN take some massive steps forward heading into next year. But at number 1, we're going to be talking about Bryce Young of the Carolina Panthers. I did consider putting Anthony Richardson here alongside Bryce Young, but I decided to just keep it simple with just Bryce Young. Again, if you guys want to see more about Anthony Richardson, who I think could easily be on this list, I've made a couple videos around that team and around his progress this upcoming season, so go ahead and check out those videos. But for me, I think Bryce Young is arguably maybe the biggest breakout candidate in 2024. In his rookie season, he had a completion percentage of just under 60%. He had 2,877 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, and really did not have that successful of a rookie season. Now, if you know anything about the Carolina Panthers in last year's season, you would know that they were one of the worst constructed rosters in the league. And not only was it a very poor constructed, primarily offensive team, but the coaching staff did basically nothing to help a guy in Bryce Young. But this offseason, they've completely overhauled so many different positions on the offense. Both of their guard positions, some new wide receivers, the tight end and running back rooms have all been fixed up to surround Bryce Young with even more talent. And then they fired their head coach to bring in Dave Canales, who I think is going to be an exceptional coach for Bryce Young. Dave Canales has been known to fix up some flawed quarterbacks such as Geno Smith and of course Baker Mayfield last year, and now he's going to be hopefully doing the same thing for Bryce Young. I don't necessarily think that Bryce Young needs to be completely overhauled as a player. Like, I think he has good mechanics, I think his pocket presence is solid enough, he can make plays out of rhythm, and he's a very accurate quarterback with maybe some limited arm strength, but still good enough arm strength to get the job done. But with last year's team where none of the receivers could get any separation, where the offensive line couldn't hold up for more than 2 seconds, and the coaching staff just running some boneheaded plays over and over again, I don't think it was set up for Bryce Young to succeed at all last year. But again, with some overhauled pieces with guys like Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, Jonathan Brooks, and Jatavion Sanders, and the new offensive lineman, this team should take some massive steps forward in next year's season. I fully expect Bryce Young to have easily over 3,000 passing yards, probably about 3,500 if things go great next year. I think he should about double his touchdowns from 11 last year to over 20 next year and keep his interceptions as low as possible. We've seen Dave Canales work some wonders, and I fully do expect him to work some wonders with Bryce Young and this current Carolina Panthers team. But if I missed any names, you guys can let me know in the comment section below, and we will potentially make a part 2 to this video later in the offseason. And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button. But I love you guys. Peace.